As the last bell of the day rang, I looked around my 5th grade classroom. All 27 of my students were packing up their things. I walked over to my desk, turned on the overhead light, and opened my grade book. Time for attendance. I started calling off names. As they finished their work, the students stood up and said, "Here," then returned to their seats. By the time I was ready to dismiss them, only 3 students remained: Sam, Maria, and Tommy. Sam was hanging upside down on his chair like a bat. He had been all day. He flipped himself right side up, and Maria still had her nose buried deep in her book. She finally looked up and followed her classmates out the door. And Tommy, well, he was still staring intently at his desk. "Tommy, it's time to go," I said, walking over to his desk. His eyes were still glued to the desk. He didn't respond. "Tommy," I tapped him on the shoulder. He jumped, startled, and turned in his seat. His face was pale and his eyes were wide and scared. "What are you doing?" I asked. "What did you do?" He shook his head, then pushed his chair back. It scraped loudly against the floor. He got up and hurried to the door. Then he stopped and turned around. He was biting his fingernails. "Mrs. Hayes, can I have some water?" he asked. I nodded toward the water cooler in the hall. "Go ahead," I said. He scurried out the door, leaving me alone in the room. As I prepared to lock up, I heard what sounded like sniffles coming from under one of the desks. I couldn't imagine who it could be. I checked the windows. They were closed. I checked the door. It was locked. Then I went over to the desk. Cautiously, I peered under it. "Who's there?" I asked. No response. I couldn't see anyone. Then I felt something. I reached under the desk and felt a pair of sneakers. I pulled them out and looked at them. They weren't Tommy's. I slipped them on my feet. They were way too small. Who could they belong to? Then I heard it again, the sniffling. This time it was coming from behind the bookcase. I went to the other side of the room and pulled the heavy bookcase away from the wall. I felt a rush of air and smelled something strange, like chlorine and mildew. I stepped back and peered around the bookcase. There he was. One of my students, Kevin, was hiding behind the bookcase. He had his knees pulled up to his chest and his face buried in his arms. "Kevin, why are you hiding here?" I asked. Prue. He jumped and looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. "I thought you were going to take away my Game Boy if you found me," he whispered. "I wouldn't," I said. "Why would I take away your Game Boy?" "Because I brought it to school," he said. "I'm sorry." "It's okay," I said. "But it's time to go home now." He nodded, but he didn't move. "Come on," I said, extending my hand. "Let's go." He took my hand and stood up. Then he ran outside, leaving me alone again. As I began to clean up the clutter on the floor, I couldn't help but wonder where everyone had gone. It was 3:30. Usually the neighborhood kids would be out playing kickball or riding their bikes. But today, the streets were deserted. I walked to the window and looked out. That's when I noticed it. A thick fog had settled over the city. It was so dense that I could barely see the buildings across the street. My heart skipped a beat. Where were all the kids? Why hadn't I seen the fog earlier? Had it been there all along? Shaking off the uneasy feeling, I returned to my desk to get my purse. That's when I noticed my grade book lying open on the desk. I stared at the list of names. There was one name I didn't recognize, Isabella Santos. I had never had a student with that name. I looked through my class photos, but I didn't see her in any of them. I double-checked the grade book. The name was definitely there. I just didn't know what to make of it. I shrugged and went out into the hall to turn off the overhead light. That's when I saw it. Another name on another grade book. This one was propped up against the lockers down the hall. I walked over and read the name aloud. Isabella Santos. My blood ran cold. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and gasped. Standing in the hall were two figures. They were identical, except for the fact one was holding a great book. I couldn't make out their faces because they were both wearing dark. Their eyes, though, they were glowing red in the darkness. I screamed and ran, but they were faster than I was. They caught up with me and blocked my path. I tried to push past them, but their grip was like iron. "Let me go," I cried. They didn't respond. Instead, they reached out and grabbed my shoulders. Their icy fingers dug into my flesh. I struggled, but their grip was too strong. "Help," I screamed. "Please, help me." They dragged me down the hall and into the library. Books fell from the shelves as they passed, but they didn't seem to care. They kept walking until we reached the back of the library. There, in the shadows, I saw a door. It wasn't there before. They pushed me through the door and into a dark, narrow hallway. I stumbled forward, trying to make out the shapes in the darkness. That's when I saw them. All of my students were lined up against the wall. They were all wearing those same red hoodies. In the flickering light, their faces were contorted in evil grins. Their eyes glowed a menacing red. "Mrs. Hayes," they all said in unison. I screamed and backed away. "What have you done with the real students?" I demanded. They didn't respond. Instead, they began to advance toward me, their eyes never leaving my face. I turned and ran, but it was no use. They were faster than I was. I could hear their footsteps pounding on the floor behind me. I could feel their hot breath on my neck. Then I tripped. I fell to the ground, scraping my palms and knees. I looked back. They were almost upon me. I could see their hands reaching for me, their nails like hooks. I closed my eyes tight and waited for them to grab me, but they didn't. Instead, I heard a voice. One, it said. I opened my eyes. They were gone. In their place was my class pet hamster, Horatio. He was standing on the floor, staring at me. "One," he said again. Horatio hopped off the floor and ran over to my desk. He climbed onto my desk and stared at me, his little black eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Two," he said. I watched in amazement as Horatio began to grow. He grew larger and larger until he was the size of a small dog. "Three," he squeaked. He leaped off the desk and ran toward me. I screamed and tried to crawl away, but he was too quick for me. He pounced on me and sank his sharp teeth into my arm. I cried out in pain, and he released me. 4, he squeaked. He hopped back onto the desk and stared at me. I could see the others behind him. They were getting closer. 5, Horatio squeaked. Plow. And then everything went black. Hello, I'm here. I have a scary story for you. Let's begin. In a place where the air itself feels heavy with secrets, there exists a school that has stood silent for over a decade. Its halls, once bustling with the laughter of children, now echo with an eerie quiet. But tonight, for teenagers are about to shatter the silence, unaware of the horrors that await them within its forsaken walls. It was just another ordinary day in our sleepy little town until I heard about what happened at that old school. You see, this isn't just any school. It's the kind of place that locals avoid after dark, and with good reason, because it's been closed for over 10 years. Locals say it's haunted, and no one dares go near it, especially not after dark. So when I heard that some kids dared to do just that, I couldn't help but feel a shiver crawl up my spine. What were they thinking? Who would dare set foot in that cursed place? Well, as it turns out, there were 4 of them. 4 teenagers looking for a good scare. They probably thought it was going to be a night like any other, just a simple game of dare. But what they found in that abandoned school was something straight out of a nightmare. The night started off pretty normal. These 4 friends had gotten together and were hanging out in their usual spot, just having fun and being carefree. But then, as it always seems to happen, the topic of ghosts came up. One of them, Jake, dared to challenge the others, daring them to go to the old school and stay there for 5 minutes. No one wanted to go at first. The old school wasn't just some abandoned building. It was a local legend, a place where people went missing and never came back. It had become a sort of urban myth, a scary story. Parents used to tell their kids to keep them away from the old school. But as the night wore on, the dares got bigger, and soon Emma found herself agreeing to go to the old school. Now, normally she wasn't such a daredevil, but tonight she was feeling brave, or maybe just a little reckless. As the others urged her on, Emma started walking towards the old school. The closer she got, the darker it became. The street lights flickered ominously, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to mock her courage. With each step, the weight of her decision pressed down on her, making it harder to turn back. As she stood outside the old school, she could feel the darkness seeping into her bones. A cold, so intense, it seemed to suck the warmth right out of her body. She hesitated for a moment, the darkness pressing in on her, whispering tales of terror. But then she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped inside. The school was dark and silent, the only sound her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. The air was thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. She could feel the darkness all around her, pressing in from all sides, closing in like a suffocating blanket. Panic started to rise in her chest, threatening to overwhelm her. She wanted to run, to break free from the oppressive darkness, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. Breathe. Then she heard it, a sound so unexpected that it sent a jolt of terror through her. The lockdown alarm. It was a jarring, high-pitched screech that seemed to pierce through the darkness, shattering the silence of the night. In an instant, the hallway was flooded with light and the sound of slamming doors. One by one, the doors slammed shut, sealing the fate of anyone who hadn't made it to cover. Now, trapped in this labyrinth of darkness and despair, Emma knew she had to escape, to find a way out before it was too late. She started running, her heart pounding against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat. Purr. She could hear the echo of her own footsteps, the sound bouncing off the walls, mocking her fear. She didn't know where she was going, just that she had to keep moving, had to find a way out of this nightmare. As she ran, she could feel the darkness pressing in on her, trying to hold her back, to drag her down into its suffocating depth. But she pushed on, fueled by fear and adrenaline, desperate to escape the clutches of the relentless darkness. The old school was alive with unseen horrors, and she had to get out before it claimed her as its own. Emma stumbled out of the school, gasping for breath, her body shaking with terror. Behind her, the school loomed, dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. She turned back to look, her heart still pounding in her chest, but there was nothing to be seen. The doors were wide open, inviting her back into its shadowy embrace. She wanted to scream, to call out for help, but no sound escaped her lips. Her voice was trapped in her throat, stolen by the darkness that had almost consumed her. As she stood there, frozen in fear, the darkness seemed to press in on her, reaching out like grasping claws, trying to pull her back into its suffocating grasp. Then, from inside the school, she heard it again, the sound that had haunted her worst nightmares, the slam of a door. Das. It was a heavy, resounding thud that echoed through the night, sending shivers down her spine. Could someone else be trapped inside? Or was it the darkness playing tricks on her, tormenting her with whispers of fear? She didn't wait to find out. She turned and ran, stumbling over the rough pavement, her eyes fixed on the distance, her mind screaming at her to keep moving, to escape the clutches of the old school. As she ran, she could feel the darkness behind her, reaching out for her, trying to drag her back into its endless abyss. But she wouldn't let it win. She wouldn't let the darkness consume her. With a final burst of strength, she reached the safety of her home, collapsing on the doorstep, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. As she looked back at the old school, she could feel the darkness oozing out of its shadowed windows, seeping into her bones, and chilling her to the core. And then, as if mocking her terror, the light flickered on inside, casting an eerie glow on the decaying facade. But no one was there. She was certain of that. No one had followed her. That night, as the rest of the town slept, oblivious to the horrors that lurked in the darkness, Emma lay in bed, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. She could still feel the oppressive darkness pressing in on her, suffocating her whispering tales of terror. The slam of the door echoed in her ears, a constant reminder of the danger that lay in wait. Sleep was a distant dream. Each creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside her window sent her heart racing, convinced that the darkness was reaching out for her, trying to drag her back into its endless abyss. The night stretched on, each moment filled with dread and anticipation. Dawn seemed a distant memory, leaving Emma trapped in a world of darkness and fear. The next morning, the sun finally peeked through the curtains, casting a warm glow on the familiar. Birds chirped merrily. Children laughed, and the world seemed to wake from a slumber. But for Emma, the night's horrors still lingered, casting long shadows over her day. She told her friends what had happened, but they didn't believe her. Oh, they just laughed and said that it was just an old school, that there was nothing to be scared of. But Emma knew better. She knew that beneath the decaying walls of the old school, something evil stirred, waiting for its next victim. To this day, no one dares approach the old school. The mere mention of its name sends shivers down their spines. And Emma can't blame them. For her, the experience left an indelible scar, a constant reminder of the darkness that lies just beyond our perception. Do you believe in ghosts? Let me know in the comments below. Also, remember to subscribe for weekly horror stories. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. This happened to me while I was in high school. We were in our second semester of senior year, and we had just barely made it. All of our exams were over, and we were waiting for graduation. It was the end of May, so summer was right around the corner. We had one last week of classes before we got our 2-week warning, where we would have to clean out our lockers and say our goodbyes to the school before we came back for graduation. On this particular day, Mr. Williams, who was our chemistry teacher, had fallen asleep at the front of the class. It was the last period of the day, and he had been grading some paper. As we all know, when teachers fall asleep, they tend to talk in their sleep. But Mr. Williams wasn't your average teacher. While most teachers just mumble in their sleep, Mr. Williams would actually speak in full sentences. And not only that, but he would speak about some pretty bizarre things. He would ramble on about chemicals and experiments gone wrong. Sometimes he would even talk about how much he hated his job and how he wanted to kill all of his students. We had heard him say some pretty messed up things, but today was different. As I was sitting there trying to pay attention to Mr. Williams's rambling, I heard him say the words fire drill 3 times in a row. That was strange because we hadn't had a fire drill all year. I turned to my best friend, Ashley, and whispered to her, "Did he just say fire drill?" She shook her head and whispered back, "Yeah, he said it 3 times. Mr. Williams then started talking about how no one would make it out, and that he would be able to stop it. He kept saying it over and over again. The bell then rang, signaling the end of the school day. As soon as the bell rang, all of the students started packing up their stuff and heading towards the door. I could still hear Mr. Williams muttering to himself, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. All of the students had left the classroom, so I decided to stay behind for a second to see if Mr. Williams would wake up. I don't know why I did this. I guess I was curious to see what he would say next. A few minutes went by and Mr. Williams suddenly shot up in his seat. He looked around the room to make sure that he was the only person in there. He then stood up and walked towards the door. When he opened it, he looked both ways to make sure that no one was watching him. Then he ran down the hallway. I don't know where he was going, but I decided to follow him. I peeked my head out the door and saw that the hallway was empty. But I quickly ran after Mr. Williams. He was now rounding the corner towards the stairwell. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should be doing this. But something was telling me that I needed to keep following him. I took a deep breath and ran down the hallway. I followed Mr. Williams all the way down the stairs and into the basement. He then turned off the lights and closed the door behind him. I didn't want to be seen, so I hid behind a pillar. I could hear Mr. Williams talking to himself again, but now his voice sounded different. It didn't sound like he was just mumbling anymore. It sounded like he was having a full-blown conversation with someone else. He said, "It's almost ready. Just a few more things to finish up and then we can get started. I think I'll start with the boiler room. Yeah, that's a good place to begin. No one ever goes down there, so it'll be perfect." His voice was raspy and sounded like he hadn't spoken in days. I was getting scared at this point, but I couldn't help but listen in on his conversation. He continued, "I've done everything you asked of me. I set the traps, I spread the rumors, and I even made sure to turn off all of the security cameras in the basement. You won't have to worry about being caught on camera down here. There's no reception down here anyway, so even if someone did find you, you wouldn't have to worry about them calling for help. It'll be the perfect crime." At this point, I was terrified. Who was Mr. Williams talking to? Was he planning something terrible? I couldn't help but wonder. I decided to creep a little closer so I could try to make out what the other voice was saying. Mr. Williams said, "They won't know what hit them. They'll be running around like mice, trying to find the exit. But there is no exit. Once they're down here, they're trapped forever." The other voice then responded, "Good. Let the hunt begin." At this point, I was so scared that I nearly screamed. I wanted to run away, but my feet felt like they were made of lead. I couldn't move. Mr. Williams and the other person then started talking in hushed voices, and I couldn't make out what they were saying anymore. Then, suddenly, the lights flickered on, and I was suddenly face to face with Mr. Williams. He was smiling, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Looking for something," he says, his voice sounding like nails on a chalkboard. "Looking for an escape." Before I could respond, he grabbed my arm and dragged me towards the stairwell. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. I was frozen in fear. We reached the top of the stairs and he led me through the school. We went past classrooms, bathrooms, and even the cafeteria. I had no idea where he was taking me, but I knew I didn't want to find out. He then stopped in front of a door that was clearly marked "Do Not Enter." He opened it and gestured for me to go inside. "What are you waiting for?" he asked. "Come on in." I hesitated for a moment, but then I walked through the door. The room was dark, but I could make out the shape of a person sitting in a chair. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. compressor. The person stood up and turned around. It was Mr. Williams's wife, Mrs. Williams. She was smiling, but it wasn't a friendly smile either. It was the same kind of smile that Mr. Williams had. "I'm here to help you," she said. "We're going to have so much fun together." Before I could respond, Mr. Williams grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the person in the chair. "Don't be scared," he said. "It's gonna be all right." He then pushed me into the chair. Bah! I struggled to get out of it, but it was no use. The more I struggled, the deeper into the chair I sank. I screamed for help, but no one came. Then I heard a voice crackle over the intercom. "Attention, students. This is an emergency announcement. We have received word that there is a person in the basement who is not supposed to be there. If you are in the basement, please leave immediately." The voice then came back over the intercom and said, "That wasn't us."